This is a story about Margaret McFaddin Harritt, a 17-year-old girl who found herself in a situation in which she wasn't sure if she would be alive in the next 5 minutes. Margaret McFaddin Harritt was a 17-year-old typical girl of mid-70s American South, and we are going back to the beginning of the story in the fall of 1973. Margaret enjoyed walking her beloved dog, spending time with her friends in their adventures, soaking up the sun during South Carolina long summers, basically everything a typical 17-year-old would be interested in. She lived in her family's house in Sumter and was a very bright and headstrong girl. She could dive so deep into books that the world around her disappeared, and she could apply the same focus to any task at hand. She finished high school in 3 years and turned 17 just days before arriving at the University of South Carolina. Margaret was hungry for adventures and new experiences. The life in South Carolina in the fall of 1973 was pretty normal and usual, but she found her little interesting world in the capital of the state, Columbia, in Five Points district, where she found a job waiting tables at a popular restaurant, Captivity Italian. One night in March 1974, when she was at her workplace, a tall and slender, long-haired guy walked into the restaurant. His mustache and goatee signaled that he was older than Margaret, by 9 years, as she would come to find out. But otherwise, he seemed an unspoiled child of nature, straightforward and simple-minded guy. His name was Joel. And from that first night, Joel continuously talked about this great adventure he is planning, to hike the Appalachian Trail, all 2,200 miles of it. This kind of venture would take months, and he told Margaret that she should definitely come with him. Margaret laughed off the idea, of course. First of all, she had just met the guy. Besides, she wasn't really an athletic person. She hadn't intentionally exercised a day in her life. And dragging herself up the mountains for months did not sound like any fun. But Joel kept coming back, talking non-stop about the trip. Day by day, Margaret liked Joel more and more. Not actually in a romantic way, but more like a friend. She was amazed with his deep interest in the world around him, his upbeat personality, his generosity. Joel wanted to pursue big, life-shaping experiences that he was eager to share, and that was very appealing to Margaret. That, and the fact that she wouldn't return to university in fall as she felt out of place there and uninspired, made Margaret think that maybe a long walk with an interesting and inspiring guy wasn't that bad idea, until she figures out what her next step in life would be. Margaret's father was a physician. He was an energetic freethinker with a nickname Wild Bill between his friends. Her mother was passionate with everything she did in life. She didn't let her childhood polio keep her from college and a career as a clinical pathologist, raising 4 children and juggling days crowded with errands. Like both of her parents, Margaret was intellectually curious and wanted to know more about the world. She absorbed books on Eastern religions and similar, and in their pages she detected thoughts that resonated with her. That time is vast and human life is short. This all made her say yes to Joel and his adventure. In 1974, Appalachian Trail wasn't nearly as popular as today, and only about 80 to 90 people did a through hike yearly. When she announced this decision to her friends, they were all very surprised, because they all knew about the trail, about the name, but didn't actually know anyone who went there and did that kind of stuff. Margaret as well did not know much about the trail, and she wasn't experienced at all in this kind of activities. But she trusted Joel with his plan, and she knew he prepared for this for months. Their adventure started on May 9th, 1974, at the southern end of the Appalachian Trail at Springer Mountain in Georgia. Already at the start, Margaret was amazed with the beauty of the scenery. In spring, maples, oaks, and tulip trees were just beginning to bud. However, this beauty came with a price. The trail climbed steadily and unmercifully. The burden of their overloaded backpacks, accompanied with Margaret's blisters, became too much for two amateurs in hiking, and after covering only 6 miles that day, they decided to wrap up for the day. In the early evening, they found the Low Gap shelter, where they would spend the night and get a fresh start in the morning. As they entered the shelter, they found another hiker already there, settled on the floor. He looked harmless, down on his luck, and it appeared he was around there for some time, because it could be seen that he hadn't had a shower for some time. He had only a few belongings, a blanket, leather jacket, and small backpack. He didn't seem as a hiker, because he was missing all the proper gear for hiking. In the first few minutes, they got to know that his name was Ralph. Margaret went out to a nearby stream to wash up a little bit, and Joel followed her, saying that he wasn't sure he trusts this Ralph guy. Then they realized Ralph is alone in the shelter with their backpacks and majority of their stuff. So they decided to rush back to the shelter, but when they came back, Ralph was still in the same place and their gear untouched. Margaret and Joel started a fire and cooked something for dinner, offering Ralph as well, but he declined. While the two of them were eating, they saw Ralph leaving the shelter and going into the woods. Then, after a while, he came back with arms full of wood for the fire. He went a few more times to gather more supplies. Although they were a little bit suspicious about him at first, now both of them commented that maybe he is alright, normal guy. Still, they decided to leave first thing in the morning and have breakfast somewhere after they have hiked a mile or two. Not long after that, Margaret decided to crawl into her sleeping bag, and Joel stayed with Ralph around the fire, but neither said much. Margaret had fallen asleep shortly. She was awakened by Joel urging her to get moving. Oh, it was already morning, and Joel was packed up and ready to leave, shelter and continue hiking. His large green backpack was leaned against the tree in front of the shelter, and they would get going as soon as Margaret packs. In the meantime, Ralph had already woken up and went outside of the shelter. Just as Margaret was almost ready and lacing her boot, she suddenly heard a loud and sharp noise, like a bang. Confused, she immediately looked outside and saw Joel falling to the ground. His head hit the ground at the fire ring, and he remained motionless at the ground. Before Margaret even had the time to process the scene, Ralph already jumped into the shelter and stood nervously in front of her with a revolver in his hand. She was just too shocked to say or do anything. She just repeated, What? At first, still not completely awoken, as she had woken up basically a few minutes ago, she wasn't sure if she was dreaming. Like, what is happening? Ralph told her to be quiet and tied her hands behind her back, ordered her to get up to her feet, and rushed her on the narrow path that was leading into the woods. Still in complete shock, she just whispered with fear, "Is Joel dead?" Ralph answered her that he wasn't dead, just hurt. Although very scared, she asked Ralph if he could pull Joel away from the fire ring so that he wouldn't get burnt. Surprisingly, Ralph said yes, that he could do that. Then he set her by the tree, tied her legs as well, and blindfolded her. "What are you going to do to me?" she asked. He replied indifferently, "I don't know." When Ralph removed her blindfold after 10 or 15 minutes, Joel was nowhere to be seen. He wasn't a bit further from the fire ring, like Margaret pleaded. She asked Ralph where was Joel, and got another very indifferent answer. "I got rid of him," he said. Margaret was now even more terrified and kept praying to herself that Joel wasn't badly hurt. She didn't know what to think what is going to happen to her now. She had no idea what actually happened to Joel, and there was probably no one there in miles. Ralph could do whatever he wishes without anybody seeing him. He could run off into the woods and get away with what he has done. What does he even want? If he wanted to attack them, why not at night? With all those thoughts in her mind, Ralph ordered her to eat and drink, while he was going through Joel's backpack, mainly looking for money. Then he tied her back again to a tree near the shelter. He even put the backpack behind her back to rest, and water beside her in Joel's helmet, as well as a watch. He said that he would leave a note in the shelter, that she's here, and just walked off. Margaret was so relieved. She felt like a huge stone was removed from her chest. She felt like she could breathe again without him near. She knew very well that she was still in trouble being tied to a tree and all, but without Ralph here, she at least knew he couldn't do her any harm, or kill her. And just when she felt a little bit more relaxed, and not so much scared for her life anymore, she saw him. She saw Ralph coming back. Her thoughts were going wild, and she was frightened again. However, he just said that he wasn't sure that anybody would find her here, and told her that she could either stay here tonight, or she could hike with him out of the mountains, and there she could head to the highway and ask for help. Although none of these options were good or safe, in the end she decided to go with him, in fear of being tied up for days without food, and nobody finding her. She hoped that if Ralph wanted to hurt her, he would probably do it by now. Right? Margaret was going first, with her hand now untied, and Ralph was behind her with a gun. He threatened her that if they ran into anyone, and she would try to tell them or signal anything, he would just kill them all. That actually happened. Well, not killing them all, but when they were resting, they ran into two foresters with chainsaws. But everything went fine and they didn't notice anything suspicious. They didn't chat too much, but Ralph told Margaret that he escaped from jail and needed to travel fast and light. That is why he took Joel's gear. When they got very close to the road crossing, Margaret's worst fears have come true. Ralph had changed his mind. He will not release Margaret now that they have reached the road, as he said before. Instead, they would travel together to the nearest town, get a motel room, and he would release her in the morning. As until now, Ralph threatened Margaret that he would kill her if she tries to escape or signals anything to anyone. They hitchhiked, and one young woman even gave them a lift, and suggested them where they could stay for the night without IDs, because Ralph told the woman that they had traveler's checks, which he had actually stolen from Joel, but didn't have their IDs with them now. They checked into Chattahoochee Motel, and Ralph signed them as Mr. and Mrs. Paulson. He practiced Joel's signature to cash his traveler's checks. Although Margaret was still very suspicious and frightened if Ralph would suddenly decide to harm her, she was so tired from the hiking and emotionally tired of being stressed and terrified that she had fallen asleep and slept through the night on the bed, while Ralph was in a chair with a gun. In the morning, her agony continued as Ralph once again changed plans and told her that she will have to go to Cleveland's railway station first with him, and then later they will go separate ways. They went together to Cornelia, from where they had buses directly to the east. All this time, Margaret was scared to try to escape or do anything. She was just paralyzed in fear after seeing with Joel what this man was capable of. She didn't doubt at all that he would try to kill her and maybe someone else if she tried anything. When they arrived to Cornelia bus station, Ralph decided that he would now let Margaret go, and he bought a bus ticket to Atlanta, and Margaret bought a ticket to Columbia. She felt a little bit relieved and full of hope that maybe this is the end of the agony. However, Ralph changed his mind so many times that she didn't let herself relax until they really parted their ways. Soon, her torment would really come to an end. She looked in disbelief when Ralph took his bus, and the bus drove away, with Ralph in it. She was finally free. She wasn't sure if this moment would even come for her. At that moment, she remembered Joel. He was in her thoughts all the time, but with being exhausted and with everything happening, at moments she almost forgot that he was up there in the mountains. She knew she needed to get fast to someone and tell what happened to them immediately. Instinctively, first she tried to call her family, parents and elder brother, but as she wasn't able to reach them at that moment, next she called Columbia Police. The call was relayed from Columbia Police to Georgia, and Sheriff Frank Baker called Georgia Bureau of Investigations for backup, as they had to find a missing person, which they were not sure if is alive or dead, and at the same time they had maybe a murderer on the loose. For Joel, at least they knew where he was, or at least where he should probably be. The sheriff and special agent Stanley Thompson headed to the Low Gap shelter, following everything Margaret said and described. There they found Joel close to the shelter. His head was wrapped in plastic bag, which was obviously used to strangle him. Ralph wanted to make sure to leave Joel dead. Ralph first shot Joel in the head. That was the bang Margaret heard while lacing her boot in the shelter. The autopsy revealed that a .38 caliber bullet had entered Joel's skull just behind his left ear. Unfortunately for Joel, it did not end well. The police then shifted focus to finding and arresting Ralph. Fortunately, very soon a woman called Atlanta Police Department and said she met a man matching Ralph's description, and this tip led the police to his apartment. He wasn't there, but they found Joel's belongings and a gun with 4 live rounds and 1 empty cartridge. The man was soon found and arrested. It turned out it was Ralph Howard Fox, 31 years old, from Detroit, and Margaret picked him out during police lineup. The bullet from Joel's head was also a match with Ralph's gun found in his apartment. It turned out that Ralph was a very troubled person, involved in several crimes before, such as kidnapping, car theft, even sexual assault. He was imprisoned, but escaped prison, then was arrested again. When he crossed paths with Joel and Margaret at the Appalachian Trail, he was on parole, and few days earlier he tried to murder his ex-wife, but a rifle missed the woman. Then he decided to escape to Appalachian Trail. Joel and Margaret were right when they said he didn't look as a hiker. He definitely wasn't one. Ralph Fox was indicted for murder the following October in 1975, and he pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced to life in Georgia State Prison. In July of 1991, so 16 years after, he was given a 1-month release from prison when his brother died. But he did not return to prison as he was paroled after that. This turned out to be a disastrous decision, because only 7 months after he was paroled, he killed 29-year-old Diane Good from Detroit by strangling her and leaving her nude body in a muddy field. Old habits die hard, and he was sent to prison again, where he died in 2003 from lung cancer. The story of Joel Eugene Paulson and his horrible end in 1974 was the first recorded murder on the Appalachian Trail, which would be followed by more cases of murder and strange on this trail.